If you feel exhausted after certain conversations, it's not because you're weak. It's because you're giving access without limits. Here's the sentence that stops the drain. Let me think about that and get back to you. Say it once. Don't explain it. That pause protects your energy before resentment builds. This sentence sets the boundary, but what happens next is what determines whether it holds. That's explained in today's Stoic Focus Lab episode. You're in your car after work, keys still in the ignition, staring at your phone because you just saw the name pop up. You already know what's coming, another long, heavy conversation, and your body reacts before you even answer, shoulders tight, stomach sinking, mind scanning for how to get through it without losing your whole night. Here's the uncomfortable truth: some people don't drain you because they're evil. They drain you because you keep giving them unlimited access to your attention, your time, and your emotional bandwidth. Here's your immediate micro-win. Say this exact sentence: I don't have the capacity for this right now. In the next 10 minutes, that sentence changes everything. It stops you from picking up out of reflex, then spending an hour carrying a problem that isn't yours. It keeps you from inventing excuses, over-explaining, or apologizing for having limits. It gives your nervous system permission to stand down so you can choose how to respond instead of being pulled in. Educational content inspired by classical Stoic texts. Not medical, psychological, financial, or legal advice. Let's name what this is really costing you. These draining interactions don't just steal your mood, they steal your focus. At work, they disrupt your momentum and turn a productive evening into mental fog. With money, they pressure you into quick favors, last-minute rides, loans, or commitments you didn't plan for. In relationships, they quietly train you to resent people you might otherwise care about, because you feel obligated instead of choosing freely. The clearest cost is this: you spend more time recovering from other people than investing in your own life. And what makes it tricky is that emotional vampires rarely show up wearing a sign. Sometimes they're family. Sometimes they're coworkers. Sometimes they're friends who always need 5 minutes to become 45. They might even be kind and likable. The draining part isn't always their personality, it's the pattern: crisis after crisis, complaint after complaint, urgency after urgency, and you become the default container for it. You tell yourself you're being supportive. You tell yourself it's not worth a fight. You tell yourself you'll set boundaries later. But later becomes a habit, and the habit becomes your normal. By the end of this lesson, you'll have 3 practical abilities you can use immediately. You'll be able to spot the early signs that a conversation is about to become a drain before you're already trapped in it. You'll know how to limit access calmly without turning the moment into a debate or a guilt exchange. And you'll start preserving your peace in a way that doesn't require you to disappear or become cold. You'll just become clear. If you want calmer days, cleaner relationships, and fewer nights where you feel emotionally wrung out, this channel is built for that. Stay with me until the very end, and while you're here, hit like, tap subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Here's what we're going to do. First, you'll learn how to recognize the patterns that signal you're about to be pulled into someone else's emotional world. Next, you'll practice a simple way to respond that protects your energy without sounding harsh or defensive. Then, you'll learn how to hold your line when pressure ramps up and your old people-pleasing instincts try to take over. Finally, you'll see how these tools work together in a real situation where you usually cave, overextend, or walk away frustrated. And here's the open loop that will matter later. There's a specific moment emotional vampires rely on the most, when they catch you off guard and make you feel responsible at the same time. Later in this lesson, we're going to return to that exact moment and walk through what to say so you can protect your energy without burning bridges or betraying yourself. Here's the microscript to use the moment you feel that familiar drain starting. Let me think about that and get back to you. Say it once, calmly. No explanation. No tone shift. That single sentence creates a buffer between their urgency and your energy. In the next few minutes, it prevents you from agreeing on autopilot, from being cornered into emotional labor, and from committing to something you already know you'll resent. This works because emotional vampires rely less on persuasion and more on speed. They don't usually ask for access directly, they create urgency. A crisis. A heavy story. A sense that now is the only moment. When you respond immediately, your nervous system treats the situation as an emergency, even when it isn't. By delaying your response, you interrupt that urgency loop. You're not rejecting them. You're reclaiming time to choose. Picture a familiar North American scenario. You're wrapping up your workday, mentally transitioning into your evening, when a coworker messages you with a long paragraph. It starts with "I hate to bother you," then unloads frustration, confusion, and an implied request for reassurance or help. You haven't even finished reading before your chest tightens. Old you would respond quickly, trying to be helpful, typing thoughtful replies while your own plans quietly dissolve. This time, you pause. You use the script. "Let me think about that and get back to you." You hit send and stop. No follow-up emoji. No softening language. Just the sentence. Immediately, something shifts. The pressure drops. The problem is no longer sitting in your lap demanding immediate attention. You've moved it into neutral territory where you get to decide. The common mistake here is thinking this response is rude or dismissive. It isn't. What actually feels jarring to emotionally draining people is not rejection, but loss of immediate access. They're used to unloading and receiving instant engagement. When that doesn't happen, they feel the boundary, not as aggression, but as absence. And absence is what gives you space. Here's a tiny action you can take today. Use this script once in the next 24 hours, even if the request seems small. Notice what happens next. Often, the person solves the issue themselves, finds someone else, or the emergency fades. When you do return to it later, the emotional charge is lower, and you can engage on your terms instead of theirs. Now slow this down for a moment. As soon as you send the sentence, take one breath in through your nose and let it out slowly through your mouth. Feel the relief in your shoulders or chest. That relief is information. It's your body telling you that you were about to overextend. You're not calming yourself to be polite, you're listening to a signal you usually override. This connects back to the open loop we said earlier about being caught off guard. Emotional vampires gain leverage when they combine surprise with urgency. This script removes urgency without confrontation. It buys you time, which is the one thing draining dynamics can't survive. Over time, this changes how people approach you. Some will respect the boundary and adjust. Others will drift, because the relationship was built on access rather than connection. Either outcome is data. You're not obligated to manage their reaction. Your responsibility is to manage your energy. Notice what this does internally as well. Each time you delay instead of immediately engaging, you retrain yourself out of people-pleasing. You stop equating worth with availability. You learn that you can pause without things falling apart. That confidence compounds. This isn't about becoming cold or unavailable. It's about accuracy. Immediate responses feel kind, but they often come at your expense. Delayed responses feel uncomfortable at first, but they preserve your peace. The difference is a single sentence, used at the exact moment you usually give yourself away. And later, when we move into a real-life situation where the pressure is higher and the relationship stakes are real, you'll see how this simple delay becomes the foundation for boundaries that actually hold. You're already tired when the call comes in. It's late, you were just about to sit down, and you can see their name on the screen. You hesitate for half a second, then answer anyway. Within 2 minutes, the conversation turns heavy. Complaints pile up. Problems multiply. There's an unspoken expectation that you'll listen, fix, reassure, or at least absorb it all. By the time you hang up, your evening is gone, and there's a low irritation sitting in your chest that you don't quite know what to do with. The mistake here isn't that you answered the call. The mistake is what you told yourself in that first half second of hesitation. You told yourself it would be easier to just get it over with. You told yourself it would be selfish to interrupt. You told yourself you could handle it. Those thoughts feel responsible, even kind, but they quietly override your limits before you've had a chance to check them. Here's the correction, and it's uncomfortable at first. Use this exact line when the conversation starts turning draining. I can listen for a few minutes, but then I need to stop. That sentence does something most people never do. It names a limit before the damage is done. It doesn't criticize them. It doesn't explain your whole life. It simply tells the truth about your capacity. This works because emotional vampires rely on ambiguity. When there's no clear boundary, they expand to fill the space. Not always maliciously, but predictably. When you state a limit early, you collapse that ambiguity. You turn an open-ended drain into a contained interaction. Your nervous system relaxes because it knows there's an end point. Imagine how this plays out in a familiar setting. A family member calls it just to vent. You answer, already bracing. This time, instead of waiting until you're overwhelmed, you set the frame immediately. You say the line, calmly. There's a brief pause on the other end. Maybe a small sigh. Maybe a mild surprise. Then the conversation continues, but differently. They get to the point faster. The emotional intensity stays lower. And when your time is up, you actually end the call. The old pattern would have you pushing past your limit, hoping they notice your exhaustion. They rarely do. This new pattern makes your limit visible without turning it into a confrontation. And visibility changes behavior more reliably than resentment ever does. Here's a tiny action to practice today. Pick one interaction where you usually stay longer than you want. Decide in advance what your limit is, even if it's just 10 minutes. State it at the beginning, not the end. Notice how different the conversation feels when the container is clear from the start. Now interrupt the pattern in your body. As you say the boundary, feel your feet on the floor. Let your shoulders drop. Take one slow breath and notice the urge to explain or soften the line. Don't follow it. That urge is old conditioning. You don't need to argue for your limits for them to be real. What surprises most people is how often this doesn't lead to conflict. Sometimes the other person adjusts. Sometimes they don't, and that tells you something important about the relationship. Either way, you walk away with your energy intact instead of depleted. This also changes something deeper. You stop treating your capacity as negotiable. You stop believing that being a good person means being endlessly available. Over time, you become more selective, not colder. More present, not distant. You start choosing conversations instead of enduring them. Notice how this builds on what you've already learned. In the last section, you created space by delaying engagement. Here, you're shaping the engagement itself. You're no longer just buying time, you're defining terms. That shift is subtle, but powerful. Later, we're going to place this tool inside a moment where saying no feels risky and the pressure is real. For now, pay attention to how different it feels to set a boundary before you're drained instead of after. That timing alone changes the entire dynamic. There's a belief that keeps people stuck with emotional vampires longer than anything else. If you don't stay available under pressure, you'll damage the relationship or look like the bad one. This belief sounds reasonable, especially when stakes are high, but it's false. Pressure doesn't reveal who you are. It reveals what you've been trained to tolerate. Here's the instruction that cuts through that belief. Boundaries that only work when things are calm aren't boundaries. They're preferences. A real boundary has to hold when someone pushes back. The stakes here are real. When pressure rises, your old instincts kick in. You soften your words. You add explanations. You negotiate with yourself. You stay longer than you meant to. Each time you do that, you teach the other person that your limits are flexible under stress. Over time, they don't need to cross your boundaries aggressively. They just wait until you're tired, rushed, or emotionally off balance. Use this exact script when pressure shows up. I'm going to stop here, but we can talk another time. That sentence is short on purpose. It doesn't justify. It doesn't invite debate. It closes the interaction without slamming the door. Most importantly, it ends the drain instead of extending it. Why this works is simple. Under emotional pressure, your brain wants to preserve harmony at any cost. It treats discomfort as danger. So when someone reacts with disappointment, frustration, or guilt, your system reads that as a threat and pushes you to fix it. A clean boundary interrupts that reflex. It tells your nervous system that the interaction is ending, which allows your body to settle instead of staying activated. Picture a familiar scenario. You're with friends after a long week. The room is loud, energy is high, and someone you know starts pulling you aside. At first it's casual, then it turns heavy. Complaints. Emotional unloading. You feel that familiar pull to stay, to be supportive, to not make it awkward. The belief says you have to handle it now, because walking away would look uncaring. This time, you notice the pressure instead of obeying it. You use the script. You say it calmly. There's a moment of surprise. Maybe even a hint of irritation. You don't argue with that reaction. You don't fill the silence. You step away and rejoin the group. Your heart is beating faster, but you're still standing. Now slow this moment down. Feel your feet on the ground. Take one steady breath in and a longer breath out. Notice that nothing catastrophic happened. The relationship didn't collapse. You didn't lose your standing. What you did lose was the drain. This is where many people get confused. They think holding a boundary under pressure is harsh. It's not. It's honest. Harshness comes from resentment that builds when you don't protect yourself. Clean boundaries actually reduce long-term tension because they prevent unspoken anger from accumulating. There's also a deeper effect. Each time you hold a boundary when it's uncomfortable, you retrain your nervous system. You teach it that discomfort doesn't equal danger. That lesson matters because emotional vampires depend on your discomfort more than your kindness. When discomfort stops controlling you, the dynamic shifts. This ties directly into the tools you've already practiced. First, you delayed engagement so urgency couldn't hook you. Then, you defined limits early so conversations didn't sprawl. Now, you're learning how to end an interaction when pressure tries to override your capacity. These aren't separate skills. They're layers of the same ability, choosing yourself without attacking others. Here's what most people don't expect. When you stop giving in under pressure, some relationships improve. The interaction becomes lighter, more respectful. Others fade. Not because you did something wrong, but because the connection was built on access rather than mutual care. Both outcomes are clarifying. And this sets us up for what's coming next. In the next section, you'll walk through a real-life situation where all of this comes together at once. You'll see the delay, the early limit, and the firm ending play out in a moment where your old pattern would almost certainly take over. Pay attention to how the boundary holds, not because the other person changes, but because you do. It's a Wednesday evening, and you're already worn down. Work ran long, traffic was heavier than usual, and all you want is a quiet night to reset. You've just changed into something comfortable when your phone buzzes. It's a message from someone who almost always needs something. Even before you open it, your body reacts. A familiar tightness settles in your chest. Your mind starts preparing for the drain before it even arrives. The message is long. It starts with a casual opener, then slides into frustration, confusion, and emotional weight. There's an implied expectation that you'll read carefully, respond thoughtfully, and stay present until they feel better. The old reaction rises fast. You feel responsible. You feel like it would be easier to just engage now than to deal with the guilt of not responding. Your thumb hovers over the screen, ready to type. You pause. Not because the urge disappeared, but because you remember the first tool. You don't respond immediately. Instead, you take one slow breath, longer on the exhale, and say to yourself that you'll think about it and get back to them. You notice how even that internal decision lowers the pressure slightly. You put the phone down on the counter and let a few minutes pass. When you pick it up again, the urgency isn't as loud. You reply with the delayed script you practiced. Short. Calm. No apology. No explanation. As soon as you send it, there's a wave of discomfort. Part of your worries were that you were too cold. Another part wants to follow up and soften it. You don't. You sit at the table, feet on the floor, and let the sensation move through without acting on it. After a few breaths, the discomfort fades into something manageable. Later that night, the person replies. They still want to talk. They're still emotional. This is where the second tool comes in. Instead of opening the door fully, you decide your limit ahead of time. You call them back and, early in the conversation, you say you can listen for a few minutes, but then you'll need to stop. Your voice is steady, even though your body feels alert. The conversation unfolds differently than usual. They get to the point faster. There's less circling, less emotional sprawl. You listen, but you're not absorbing everything. When your time is up, you feel the familiar urge to push past it. The old pattern almost takes over. You could stay a little longer. It wouldn't kill you. That thought is automatic. This time, you don't negotiate with it. You use the third tool. You tell them you're going to stop here and that you can talk another time. There's a brief silence on the line. It feels longer than it is. Your shoulders tense. You stay still. One breathe in. Longer breath out. You don't fill the space. They respond with mild disappointment, but not outrage. The call ends. You put the phone down and notice something surprising. Your evening is still intact. You're a little keyed up, but you're not drained. You didn't spiral. You didn't resent them. You didn't resent yourself. As the night goes on, you realize how different this feels from the usual pattern. Normally, you'd be replaying the conversation, wondering if you said too much or too little. You'd feel that familiar mix of irritation and guilt. Tonight, there's none of that. Just a quiet sense of having handled something well. What made the difference wasn't the other person's behavior. They didn't suddenly become easy. The difference was the sequence. You delayed instead of reacting. You named your limit before you were exhausted. And when pressure showed up, you ended the interaction cleanly instead of letting it stretch until you were empty. By the time you get into bed, your body feels calmer than it usually does after these interactions. There's no emotional hangover. No need to recover tomorrow. You protected your peace without a fight, without a speech, and without disappearing. This is what applying boundaries looks like in real life. It's not dramatic. It's not perfect. It's a series of small, deliberate choices made while discomfort is present. And when you make those choices consistently, you stop organizing your life around other people's emotional demands. You start waking up with more energy, more clarity, and more trust in your ability to take care of yourself. What you've been practicing through this entire lesson is the difference between reacting and responding. Reacting is fast, automatic, and driven by the urge to make discomfort stop as quickly as possible. Responding is slower, intentional, and grounded in who you want to be after the interaction is over. Emotional vampires don't lose their power because they change. They lose their power when you stop handing your energy over on reflex. Instead of scattering yourself across other people's problems, you stay centered and deliberate. First, you learned how to slow the moment when someone reaches for your attention so urgency couldn't hijack you. You saw that most draining situations only work because they move too fast for you to check in with yourself. Then, you practiced creating space by delaying engagement, which immediately reduced pressure and gave you choice back. Next, you learned how to set a clear limit early, before resentment builds, instead of waiting until you're already exhausted. After that, you stress-tested those limits under pressure and learned how to end an interaction cleanly when someone pushes back. Finally, you watched all of those tools work together in a real situation where your old pattern almost took over and didn't. Not because the other person became easier, but because you stayed grounded. Here's the lesson to lock in: emotional vampires only have access to the energy you don't protect. When you react, you hand your time and attention over to guilt, habit, or fear of disappointing someone. When you respond, you decide intentionally how much access you're willing to give. That decision doesn't make you selfish. It makes you honest. And honesty is what preserves your peace long term. Now let's turn this into action with exactly 3 things to do today. First, today, the next time someone reaches out with urgency, delay your response on purpose. Use the exact delay sentence you practiced earlier and then stop engaging. Give yourself at least 10 minutes before deciding anything. Pay attention to how quickly the pressure drops once you don't respond immediately. That drop is your signal that the urgency wasn't yours to carry. Second, once today, set a limit at the beginning of a conversation you'd normally let run too long. Decide the time or capacity in advance and state it calmly, without explanation. Notice the discomfort that follows and don't rush to smooth it over. Let the boundary exist without defending it. This trains your nervous system to tolerate the feeling that usually pulls you back into overextending. Third, today or tonight, practice ending one interaction cleanly instead of stretching it until you're drained. Use the closing script when your capacity is reached and then stop talking. Don't add a follow-up message. Don't apologize for needing space. When the interaction ends, check in with your body and notice the difference between clean discomfort and the exhaustion you're used to feeling. If you want to keep building on this work, the next lesson to watch focuses on overexplaining and guilt, specifically, why saying too much weakens your boundaries instead of strengthening them. A helpful follow-up title is Stop Explaining Yourself, Boundaries Without Guilt. It matters because emotional vampires rely on your explanations to reopen doors you were trying to close, and learning to say less makes every boundary easier to hold. Before we close, it's important to redefine what success looks like here. You didn't learn how to eliminate draining people from your life overnight. You learned how to stop abandoning yourself in their presence. That's the real shift. Calm isn't the absence of discomfort, it's the ability to feel discomfort without letting it dictate your behavior. When you stay calm, you're not being passive. You're being precise. Over time, this changes the shape of your days. You stop scheduling your life around recovery. You stop dreading certain names on your phone. Conversations feel lighter because they're chosen, not endured. You trust yourself more, which means you're less reactive and less resentful. Some relationships deepen because they adjust to the new clarity. Others fade because they were built on access rather than mutual respect. Both outcomes move you closer to peace. This approach isn't about perfection. You'll still feel the pull to overextend sometimes. You'll still catch yourself wanting to explain or fix or smooth things over. What changes is how quickly you notice it and how often you choose differently. Spirals get shorter. Boundaries get cleaner. Recovery time disappears because there's nothing to recover from. If you take nothing else from this lesson, take this: your energy is not a public resource. The pause before you respond is where your freedom lives. That pause is where you decide whether this moment will drain you or strengthen you. And every time you choose to protect your capacity, you reinforce the kind of life you actually want to live. If you feel messages like this need to reach more people, hit like, tap subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.